My name is Glenn, and I never imagined the greatest threat to everything I built would come from my own son. At his birthday party, surrounded by laughter and expensive wine, my granddaughter suddenly gripped my arm and whispered, "Grandpa, leave now." That moment saved me from signing away 40 years of blood and sweat to a son who saw me not as a father, but as an obstacle. The betrayal cut deeper than any business loss, because this time it was my own flesh and blood. What followed was a battle not of fists, but of truth, one that would expose lies, crush reputations, and leave only one light of hope shining in my family, my granddaughter. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more powerful stories like this. I was sitting in my study that evening, the kind of quiet moment a man my age cherishes. The newspaper lay folded on the arm of my chair, my reading glasses perched low on my nose. That's when the front door flew open without so much as a knock. Trevor, my son, stormed in like a salesman about to make the pitch of a lifetime. "Dad, you need to listen to me this time. This is it, the opportunity we've been waiting for." His voice carried the kind of manic confidence I'd heard too many times before. I removed my glasses, folded them carefully, and set them aside. 40 years in construction had taught me patience and control, two qualities Trevor never seemed to learn. "Evening to you too, son," I said, my voice steady. "What's so urgent it couldn't wait for a proper greeting?" He paced in front of my bookshelves like a lawyer rehearsing for court. "It's a real estate syndicate, Dad. Guaranteed returns, big names behind it. This is our chance to secure the future." I stood slowly and walked to my filing cabinet. The leather of my chair creaked, the sound filling the silence as his words hung in the air. Pulling out a thick manila folder, I laid it on the coffee table. In bold letters across the front, "Trevor Investments, 2019-2025. Guaranteed, you say I asked," spreading the papers out one by one, contracts, bank statements, canceled checks. Like the Miami condos that promised 15% returns. I tapped the receipt showing $75,000 gone in less than 3 months. Or perhaps, like the cryptocurrency mining scheme, I pulled another sheet, 50,000, vanished to a slick website that disappeared overnight. Trevor's jaw tightened. His confidence faltered as his eyes locked on the pages. "That was different," he snapped, but his voice cracked. "No," I said firmly. "It wasn't. Or do you want to talk about the food truck business you launched with a partner who turned out to be a convicted embezzler, 30,000 lost in 93 days? He slammed his palm on the arm of my couch. "You never trust me, Dad. Every time I try to build something, you sabotage it with your negativity." The accusations stung, but only because I wished it weren't true. I never wanted to see my son fail. But time and again, I'd watched him gamble with other people's money and mine like a child playing with matches. "Trust is earned, Trevor," I said quietly, my voice carrying the weight of a man who had seen too many promises crumble. "And you've burned it at every turn." His face flushed red, and with a sharp jerk, he grabbed his jacket. "You'll regret this," he muttered, storming toward the door. The slam echoed through my home like a gunshot, leaving only silence behind. I stood by the window long after his car sped away, the red glow of his taillights disappearing into the night. A father is supposed to protect his son, but in that moment, I wondered, was I the one who now needed protection? The next morning, I sat in my study with a fresh pot of coffee and those same folders spread across the desk. Each page told a story. Trevor refused to read receipts of arrogance, contracts signed in haste, and bank statements drained by bad judgment. I hadn't kept them out of spite. I kept them because I knew this day would come when I'd have to defend myself, not against strangers, but against my own son. When Trevor returned 2 days later, he was calmer on the surface, but his eyes betrayed him. He walked in without waiting for an invitation, just like before. "Dad, I came to apologize," he started, though the tone was rehearsed. "I shouldn't have raised my voice. But you need to understand, this deal is different." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened the top folder and slid it across the table toward him. He glanced down and froze. It was the Miami condo project, again glossy brochures that had promised ocean views and booming rentals. "You put in $75,000, I reminded him. "And you convinced Marcus Thompson, a Chamber of Commerce member, to invest $25. Do you remember how that ended?" His lips tightened, but I turned the page before he could speak. "The cryptocurrency mining scheme. 50,000 vanished. You even showed me YouTube clips to prove it was legitimate. David Rodriguez lost 35 grand following you into that scam." "Dad, stop," he muttered, but I pressed on, flipping open another file. "The food truck business with a partner you barely vetted. Jennifer Walsh lost 20,000. She trusted you because of me, because of my reputation. That trust is gone now." Trevor's hands curled into fists at his sides. "You always keep these files like you're waiting for me to fail. You've never once believed in me." His voice rose with each word bouncing off the walls of the house I'd built with my own 2 hands. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "Belief isn't blind, Trevor. It's earned. I wanted to believe in you. God knows I tried. But every time you ask me to ignore the past, you're asking me to ignore the truth." His face turned crimson. He snatched the files off the table, scattering papers onto the floor. "You're impossible," he shouted. "You'd rather sit here cataloging my failures than give me one chance to prove myself." I stood slowly, my voice low but steady. "How many chances do you think I've given? How many times have I bailed you out, hoping you'd learn? Look around, Trevor. You're 40 years old, and you're still chasing shortcuts instead of putting in the work." The fury in his eyes told me I'd struck the nerve he couldn't bear to face. He ripped his jacket from the chair, stormed toward the door, and spat the words over his shoulder. "You'll regret this, Dad. You'll see." The door slammed again, and the silence that followed was heavier than before. I stooped to gather the scattered papers, my hands trembling slightly. Regret, maybe, but not mine. For the first time, I realized my son wasn't just reckless. He was dangerous. The house was still echoing from the slam of the door when I sat back down in my chair. I tried to tell myself it was just another outburst, another angry flare-up that would cool down like all the rest. But deep down, I knew better. A man doesn't spit out words like "you'll regret this" unless he intends to make good on them. And Trevor wasn't the boy who once begged me to teach him how to swing a hammer. He was a grown man, hardened by entitlement and failure, desperate enough to lash out at anyone who stood in his way, even me. That night, sleep was a stranger. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing every creak in the house, every branch scraping the siding. For 40 years, this home had been my fortress, but now it felt vulnerable. My own son had turned into the threat lurking outside. I thought back to my father, a man of iron will, who taught me that discipline was love, even when it felt harsh. If he were alive, would he call me too soft for letting Trevor reach this point? The next morning, the routine felt hollow. I ground my coffee beans, set the pot to brew, and sat at the kitchen table with the paper. But the words blurred on the page. My mind kept replaying Trevor's face, his anger, the way he clenched his jaw, the way he looked at me, not like a father, but like an obstacle. That wasn't disappointment anymore. That was calculation. Later that afternoon, I went out to the shed to put away some tools. The air was sharp, spring sunlight cutting across the driveway. I noticed the faint sound of a car slowing as it passed by my house, then speeding up again. When I turned, I caught a glimpse of Trevor's sedan disappearing down Maple Street. He hadn't stopped. He hadn't waved. He was watching me. My stomach sank. This wasn't a family disagreement anymore. This was a shift, one that placed me squarely in his crosshairs. I thought of Meredith, my daughter-in-law, with her designer dresses and polished smile. She had always pushed Trevor toward bigger risks, grander schemes. If he was desperate, she was gasoline on the fire. And the combination of the two made me uneasy in a way I couldn't shake. By evening, the unease had hardened into conviction. My son wasn't finished. He'd left with rage boiling in his veins, and he would come back with something more dangerous than words. I sat at my desk, staring at the stack of folders that had become my shield. Proof of his recklessness, his lies, his losses. Proof that might one day be the only thing standing between me and ruin. I whispered to myself, as if saying it out loud would make it true. He won't stop. Not until he takes something from me. Outside the street grew quiet streetlights flickering on against the darkening sky. I closed the blinds, locked the doors, and told myself I was ready. But the truth was, nothing could have prepared me for what was coming next. Sunlight spilled across the driveway, and for a moment I thought it would be an ordinary spring morning. I gathered my grocery bags, locked the front door, and stepped down the brick walkway. That's when my stride faltered. My Honda sat low, slumped on its rims like a wounded animal. All 4 tires were flat. Not slow leaks, not the kind of sag you see with age, but clean, precise punctures, deliberate wounds. I bent down, running my fingers along the rubber. That's when I found it a roofing nail embedded neatly at an angle designed to bleed the air out fast. My heart sank. These weren't random acts of mischief. This was surgical, intentional, and it spoke of someone who knew exactly how to do damage. Inside my workshop, I kept a box of the same nails. I knew their shape, their shine, the way they bent under pressure. To see them lodged in my tires was like seeing my own tools turned against me. My first thought was denial. Maybe it was kids in the neighborhood, spring break pranks gone too far. But then I remembered the way Trevor had looked at me 2 nights before, the fury in his eyes, the promise in his voice that I'd regret standing against him. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces clicked together and my chest tightened. I pulled out my phone and dialed Trevor's number. He answered groggily on the 3rd ring, his tone heavy with feigned innocence. "Dad." "What's wrong? It's barely 9. "Trevor," I said, my voice controlled. "I found my tires punctured this morning. All 4 of them." A pause. I could almost hear him recalculating. "That's terrible," he finally said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Probably neighborhood kids. You know how they get this time of year." All 4 tires I pressed. Every single one punctured nails driven at the same angle. "That's not kids, Trevor. That's professional." His voice shifted, adding just the right amount of wounded tone. "Are you accusing me of something, Dad, after everything? How could you even think?" I cut him off. "I'm just asking if you saw anything unusual when you left the other night." I drove straight home. "Look, I know we had words, but I would never do something like that. Call the police, call insurance, but don't drag me into this." I ended the call without another word. His denial sounded convincing enough to fool most people. But I wasn't most people. I'd spent decades reading subcontractors, listening to excuses, weighing lies against facts. And the facts didn't lie. My son had vandalized my car in a fit of revenge. Standing in the driveway, staring at the crippled Honda, I felt suddenly older than my 68 years. A son sabotaging his own father. That wasn't an accident. It was a declaration. The war I'd feared had already begun, and Trevor had fired the first shot. I stood over the gutted tires, the morning breeze carrying the scent of Mrs. Henderson's lilacs from next door. My stomach churned as I called ALA for a tow, giving them the details in a voice that sounded steadier than I felt. 45 minutes, the operator promised. That left me with too much time to think. I sat on the porch steps, staring at the damage like it was a crime scene. The more I turned it over in my mind, the less room there was for doubt. The precision, the timing, the fury in Trevor's eyes when he left it all lined up too neatly. I whispered under my breath, "It had to be him." That's when I heard her voice. "Morning, Glenn." Car trouble, I turned. Mrs. Dorothy Henderson, my neighbor of more than 30 years, sat on her porch, wrapped in a shawl, rocking gently in her wicker chair. She was the kind of neighbor who noticed everything but rarely interfered. Tonight, though, her sharp eyes glimmered with hesitation. "More than trouble," I answered. "All 4 tires slashed, nails clean and precise." Her rocking slowed. She looked around, then leaned forward, lowering her voice just enough that it carried across the hedges. "Glenn." I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but maybe I ought to. My chest tightened. Say anything about what? She drew a long breath. "Tuesday night, after I heard the two of you arguing, I saw Trevor. He walked out of your house, circled your car, and bent down by each tire. Looked like he had something in his hand. He did it 4 times, Glenn. All 4 wheels. Then he drove off in a hurry." Her words struck like a hammer to the ribs. For a moment I couldn't speak. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It was confirmation. My own son had vandalized my property, and now a witness, an honest neighbor I trusted, was giving me the truth I didn't want. "You're sure it was Trevor?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She didn't flinch. "I've known that boy since he was knee-high. It was him." I kept quiet because, well, family matters are delicate, but seeing you this morning, I figured you deserved to know. I nodded slowly, feeling heat rise in my chest. Not anger alone, betrayal. Deep, cutting betrayal. This wasn't a son lashing out in frustration. This was a man waging war against his own father. "Thank you, Dorothy," I said quietly. "I appreciate your honesty." Her rocking chair creaked as she settled back. "Glenn, you've worked too hard for too long to let someone, even your own son, tear it all down. Be careful." The tow truck rumbled down the street, and I stood forcing composure onto my face. But inside, the storm had already begun. First the arguments, then the threats, now this. Trevor had crossed a line, and lines once crossed cannot be undone. As the mechanic winched my Honda onto the flatbed, one thought burned hotter than the morning sun. If Trevor wanted a war, he had just declared it. 2 days after the tire incident, my phone rang while I was finishing lunch. The caller ID read, "Trevor." For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity won out, and I answered. Dad, Trevor said with forced brightness, "Tomorrow's my birthday." Meredith's planned something special, a dinner at the house. Nothing fancy, just family and a few friends. Molly asked if you'd come. It'd mean a lot to her. The mention of Molly softened me. That girl was the only reason I hadn't walked away from all of this months ago. She still looked at me with the kind of trust I thought I'd lost in my family. Of course, I said, careful with my tone. 6 o'clock sharp. When the taxi dropped me at Trevor's house the next evening, I immediately knew something was off. The walkway glowed with rented lanterns, and the faint sound of a hired string quartet drifted from the backyard. Through the windows, I could see a crowd, far more than a few friends. Men in tailored suits, women in cocktail dresses, champagne glasses glinting in their hands. Trevor met me at the door, beaming like a politician on election night. "Dad, you made it. Come in, come in." He hugged me quickly, his cologne sharp and expensive, nothing like the boy who used to come home from high school, smelling of sawdust from my workshop. Inside, the living room was unrecognizable. The old sofa was gone, replaced with sleek leather. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, scattering light across crystal stemware and polished marble counters. Caterers in black aprons floated through the room, carrying silver trays piled with hors d'oeuvres. "Happy 40th, son," I said, handing him the gift I'd chosen carefully, a professional tool set, sturdy and practical. He smiled, but I caught the flicker in his eyes, something unreadable, something calculating. Meredith emerged from the kitchen in an emerald dress that shimmered under the chandelier. She kissed the air beside my cheek. "Glenn, so wonderful you could make it. Trevor's been so excited." Her voice was sweet, but the sweetness clung like syrup, heavy and false. As I moved further inside, I realized nearly every guest was someone I didn't know. Young professionals clustered in groups talking about investments, properties, startups. The kind of people who smelled opportunity the way sharks smell blood. The liquor table groaned under the weight of premium brands I knew Trevor couldn't afford on his salary. Grandpa Molly's voice broke through the noise. She ran over and wrapped her arms around me, grounding me in a way nothing else could. "I'm so glad you came." "I wouldn't miss it, sweetheart," I said, holding her close. She was the only thing in that house that felt real. As I looked around the glittering room, unease stirred in my chest. My son, who had begged me for money just days earlier, was now hosting a party fit for millionaires. Something was wrong, and I could feel it tightening around me like a noose. Not long after I settled in, Meredith appeared at my elbow with a glass of red wine. "Your favorite, Glenn," she said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. I accepted it out of politeness, but I hadn't even taken 2 sips before she returned with another. Then Trevor appeared with a third, an imported bottle he claimed I'd once ordered at a steakhouse in Portland. Their attention wasn't hospitality, it was insistence. The pattern became clear. Every time my glass dipped below half, someone was there to refill it. Once, twice, again. It reminded me of subcontractors on job sites who buttered up inspectors with coffee and donuts, hoping to make them overlook corners cut in the concrete. But this wasn't coffee, and I wasn't an inspector. I was their target. I looked around the room as the conversations buzzed on. Young investors were swapping numbers, talking about property flips and syndicates. Trevor drifted between them like a man auditioning for a role he didn't own. Meredith laughed too loudly at every joke, her jeweled earrings catching the light with each toss of her head. Everything about the night screamed excess and desperation. Molly sat beside me on the couch for a while, chatting about finals and her psychology courses. Her presence was a comfort, a reminder that at least one branch on my family tree still reached for the sun. But even as she spoke, I noticed the way Trevor's eyes darted toward me, checking how much I'd drunk. Meredith whispered with a man near the bar, then glanced back at me with that same syrupy smile. I set my glass down untouched. My gut told me to stay sharp, and I'd learned over decades in business never to ignore instinct. "This is quite a spread," I said casually to Trevor when he came over, gesturing at the catered buffet. "Must have cost a fortune." He waved dismissively, though the twitch in his jaw betrayed him. "Meredith's been saving for months. She wanted this birthday to be special." "Special." I repeated, my tone flat. The math didn't add up. The catering alone looked like several $1,000s, not to mention the alcohol and the new furniture I hadn't seen before. A man who had begged for investment money a week ago wasn't suddenly flush with cash. Meredith appeared again, this time with a bottle of Cabernet that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill. "This pairs beautifully with the beef," she said sweetly, tilting her head like a hostess on a magazine cover. I nodded, but inside my suspicion hardened. They weren't celebrating. They were setting the stage for something. The smiles, the wine, the glittering room, it was all theater. As I swirled the untouched wine in my glass, a thought chilled me more than the evening air slipping in through the open patio doors. This wasn't just a birthday party. It was preparation. And I was the guest of honor in a play I hadn't agreed to star in. The night wore on, and though laughter echoed through the rooms, I couldn't shake the knot in my stomach. Trevor had been circling me like a salesman stalking a prospect, always hovering, always watching. At one point, he clapped me on the shoulder with the kind of enthusiasm that didn't reach his eyes. "Dad, you've got to see the renovations upstairs. Meredith and I spared no expense. Come on, you'll be amazed." Now I asked, glancing around at the crowded living room, at guests still holding full plates and half-drunk cocktails. "Shouldn't you be with your company? They'll manage," he said too quickly. "This will just take a minute." Meredith appeared beside him as if on cue, her emerald dress shimmering under the chandelier. "Yes, Glenn, you really must see the new bathroom fixtures. Imported from Italy. We're very proud." I hesitated, my instincts whispering caution. They were pressing too hard, too insistently, as though something upstairs mattered more than the dozens of guests downstairs. Trevor leaned in, lowering his voice. "You'll appreciate it. Trust me." Before I could answer, a small hand slipped around my arm. "Molly." She looked pale, her wide eyes shimmering with something I had never seen in her before, fear. She tugged my sleeve and whispered, her voice trembling. "Grandpa, please don't go upstairs. Leave now. Please." The words cut through me like ice water. I stared down at her, at the desperation in her face. For 18 years, that girl had been bright, composed, strong. But now her lip quivered, and her grip on my arm was iron. Trevor straightened, his smile rigid. "Molly, don't be dramatic. Grandpa wants to see the renovations." "No, he doesn't," she snapped, her voice cracking. Then she turned to me, her eyes begging. "Grandpa, you have to go home. Right now." Meredith's smile wavered, then quickly returned. "Sweetheart, finals must be getting to you. Stress can make people say the oddest things." But I knew better. Stress didn't plant terror that deep in someone's eyes. Stress didn't make a girl tremble as if her life depended on 2 words, "Leave now." I rose slowly from the armchair, the room suddenly too small, the air too thick. "I think I'll take my granddaughter's advice," I said evenly. "It's getting late." Dad Trevor protested, stepping closer, his smile cracking. "Don't be ridiculous. The party's just getting started. At least stay for cake." Meredith slid to my other side, her hand lightly touching my sleeve as if to anchor me. "Glenn, surely you wouldn't leave before we've really celebrated." But I saw through it now. Their coordination, their urgency, the overdone charm, it wasn't hospitality. It was entrapment. And I wasn't going to step into whatever they had prepared upstairs. I looked at Molly, whose eyes filled with tears of relief as she realized I believed her. That was all I needed. I adjusted my jacket, straightened my back, and said firmly, "Thank you for the evening. But I'll be going home now." As soon as I moved toward the front door, Trevor stepped directly into my path. His smile stretched tight across his face like a mask that was seconds from tearing. "Dad, come on, don't be stubborn. We put so much into this evening. Just one more drink, then we'll cut the cake." His insistence was too sharp, too desperate. Meredith glided to my other side, her perfume heavy in the air. "Glenn, you don't want to offend the guests. Everyone's here for family. They'd think it odd if you left so early." Her tone was polite, but her eyes were hard. I glanced at Molly, whose fingers still clutched my sleeve. Her eyes pleaded with me not to give in. That look was stronger than any argument they could make. "It's late," I said firmly, stepping around Trevor. "And I've had enough wine for one night." Trevor moved again, blocking me with the ease of a man who'd rehearsed this moment. His voice lost its cheer. "Dad, don't do this. You'll ruin everything." "Everything," I repeated, raising a brow. "It's a birthday party, son. Nothing more." The words hung heavy. For the first time that night, I saw his facade slip. His jaw tightened, the calculation in his eyes exposed. "Glenn, please." Meredith pressed her hand, brushing my arm. "At least see the upstairs. Just for a minute." "I'll pass," I said evenly. "I think I'll listen to my granddaughter." Molly squeezed my hand tighter, her whisper barely audible but fierce. "Don't let them stop you." The room had gone quiet around us. Conversations that had filled the air only minutes earlier seemed to fade as guests sensed tension, though none of them knew the stakes. Trevor's shoulders stiffened, his smile gone, now replaced with something sharper, anger mixed with panic. I grabbed my jacket from the coat closet, slipped it over my shoulders, and turned toward the door. Meredith leaned in one last time, her voice a hiss, hidden beneath the noise of clinking glasses. "You're making a mistake you'll regret." I met her eyes squarely. The only mistake would be staying. The front door clicked open, cool night air rushing in like a blessing. I stepped through, feeling Molly's grip slip reluctantly from my hand. I turned back long enough to see her face relief mixed with worry, her hand pressed against her lips. Trevor and Meredith stood frozen behind her, their plans unraveling before their eyes. Out on the walkway, I pulled my phone from my pocket and ordered a taxi. As I waited under the streetlight, I could hear muffled whispers inside, urgent and harsh. Whatever scheme they had prepared upstairs, it was over for tonight. When the cab's headlights rounded the corner, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Molly had saved me, but I knew this wasn't finished. People who plan in shadows don't abandon their goals easily. They regroup. They try again. And as I climbed into the cab, one truth chilled me more than the night air: my own son wasn't done trying to destroy me. The taxi pulled up, just as I fastened my jacket, and stepped off Trevor's porch. I opened the back door, but something made me turn one last time. Through the wide front window, I saw Molly. She had slipped away from the guests, her face pale under the golden chandelier light. She pressed her palm flat against the glass eyes locked on me. It wasn't a wave, it was a plea. A silent confirmation that leaving was the only right choice. I lifted my hand slightly, just enough for her to see, and gave a small nod. Relief flickered in her eyes, but the worry remained. Behind her blurred shapes moved Trevor, pacing Meredith, whispering furiously. Their silhouettes looked like actors whose script had fallen apart mid-performance. Sliding into the cab, I felt the weight of the evening press down on me. The driver glanced back in the mirror, noting my expression. "Rough party?" he asked. "You could say that," I murmured, leaning back into the seat. As the taxi pulled away, the house shrank in the distance, but the unease inside me only grew. Molly's warning still echoed in my ears of now. And I realized then it hadn't just been about avoiding an argument or sparing me embarrassment. It had been about danger. Real danger. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number, hoping she could slip away for a moment. She answered on the first ring, her voice hushed, frantic. "Grandpa, are you safe?" "Yes," I whispered back. "I'm in a cab heading home. Tell me what's going on." Her breath shook on the other end. "I overheard them last night. They planned to get you drunk tonight and make you sign papers. There are lawyers upstairs waiting with documents to transfer the company. Mom kept saying it would be easy once you had enough wine." My chest tightened. So that was it. The expensive catering, the endless glasses, Trevor's insistence that I go upstairs. It was all an elaborate setup. They hadn't been celebrating me. They'd been circling like wolves waiting for the moment to strike. "Are you sure?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I heard it all," Molly whispered. "Mom said once you were confused, you'd sign anything. They called you selfish for not helping Dad's investments. Grandpa, they weren't joking." I closed my eyes, the betrayal cutting deeper than any business loss I'd ever taken. My son and his wife had turned my own age against me, assuming I was weak enough to be manipulated, drunk enough to be stripped of everything I'd built. "Molly," I said, steadying my voice, "you saved me tonight. But promise me you'll stay quiet about this. Don't let them know you warned me. I'll handle it." "I promise," she whispered. As the cab turned onto Maple Street, I saw the glow of my porch light ahead. My house had never looked so much like a fortress, a place to regroup for the battle ahead. Molly had given me a chance, and I swore I'd use it not just to protect myself, but to protect her future as well. I barely had time to hang my jacket when the phone rang again. Molly's number lit the screen. I answered immediately, my heart already braced. "Grandpa, are you okay?" she whispered. The background noise of the party hummed faintly. Then a door clicked shut, muting it. "I'm fine, sweetheart." "I'm home," I said, trying to steady my voice. "But I need the truth. What exactly did you hear?" There was a pause, the kind where a person gathers courage they shouldn't need at 18. "I overheard Mom and Dad yesterday," she admitted. "They were talking in the kitchen when they thought I was upstairs. They said you'd be drinking tonight, that once you were tipsy enough, you'd sign the papers. They kept saying it was the only way to save Dad's future." My chest tightened, anger and sorrow twisting together. "Papers, yes," she whispered. "Business transfer documents. They said lawyers were waiting upstairs in the guest bedroom. Mom even joked about how older people get confused when they drink, how you wouldn't even realize what you'd signed until it was done." The words landed like blows. My own son had planned to strip me of 40 years of work by using my age as a weapon against me. And Meredith, she hadn't just encouraged it. She'd orchestrated it. I had suspected manipulation, but this was premeditated theft. Molly's voice cracked. "Grandpa, they were so confident. Mom kept saying once you signed, everything would be theirs. They thought they could trick you because you trust family." I sank into my leather armchair, the same place Trevor had stood days earlier pitching his latest miracle. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of betrayal. "Molly, do they know you overheard?" "No," she said quickly. "When you left, Dad asked why I stopped you. I told him I was worried about the neighborhood at night, that it wasn't safe for you to drive. He believed me, but I think Mom suspects." "Listen to me," I said firmly, my voice sharpening like steel. "You don't say another word to them about this, not a hint. If they think you know, they'll turn on you too. Promise me." "I promise," she whispered, but then her fear spilled out. "What if they try again?" "What if they don't stop? They won't succeed," I said. "Because you warned me. You gave me the chance to act, and I won't waste it." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy but not hopeless. It was the silence of two people realizing they were the only allies left in a broken family. "I love you, Grandpa," she said finally. "I love you too, Molly, more than you'll ever know. And one day, you'll understand why tonight changed everything." When the call ended, I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The truth was no longer suspicion or whispers, it was fact. My son had declared war on me. And now, for the first time, I was ready to fight back. After I hung up with Molly, I just sat there in the dim light of my study. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, each second reminding me that I was alone in a house filled with 40 years of honest work. And yet to my own son and his wife, I was nothing more than an obstacle, a stubborn old man hoarding money they believed belonged to them. Selfish. That was the word Molly said Meredith had used. The accusation burned. I'd given Trevor everything I could: time, guidance, opportunities. I paid for his education, gave him his first job in the construction business, even bailed him out of schemes that would have left him penniless. If selfish meant refusing to bankroll his endless gambling disguised as investments, then maybe I was guilty. But in truth, selfishness had always been his disease, not mine. I rose from my chair and walked to the mantel. There sat a photo of Trevor at 18, his graduation cap slightly crooked, his grin wide and proud. I remembered that day, the way I'd shouted his name when they called him across the stage, the pride swelling in my chest. Back then, I believed he might build something real, something lasting. Now I wondered when that boy had vanished, replaced by a man who thought betrayal was easier than hard work. As I stared at the picture, I replayed Molly's words. They'd laughed about how older people get confused when they drink. The casual cruelty cut deeper than the scheme itself. To them, I wasn't a father or a grandfather. I was a liability to be manipulated, a signature waiting to be stolen. They mistook my patience for weakness, my silence for ignorance. The truth was, I'd spent decades dealing with contractors, city inspectors, and cutthroat competitors. I knew the smell of a con. I'd tolerated Trevor's failures because he was my son, because some part of me hoped he'd learn. But now he'd crossed a line that no amount of blood could excuse. I sat back down at my desk, the weight of resolve pressing down on me. Selfish, I repeated aloud, testing the word on my tongue. No. What I felt wasn't selfishness. It was survival. If I didn't act, everything I'd built could vanish into Trevor's reckless hands, and worse, Molly would be left to pick up the pieces. For years, I had carried the guilt of enabling him. I thought protecting him from consequences was love. But I realized now that love without accountability is nothing more than permission. And by letting him escape the lessons of failure, I had created the very man who now saw me as prey. My father used to say, "A man who doesn't stand up for himself teaches the world how to walk over him." I had stood for Trevor too long. It was time to remind him and Meredith who they were dealing with. The word selfish no longer stung. Instead, it steeled me. If fighting for my life's work, my dignity, and the granddaughter who still believed in me made me selfish, then I would carry that title with pride. I woke the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The sting of Molly's words, "They called you selfish," still burned, but it had hardened into something sharper: resolve. This was no longer about disappointment or poor choices. This was a deliberate attempt to strip me of everything I had built. And if Trevor and Meredith wanted a war, they were about to see what kind of man they had underestimated. I brewed my coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, the same way I used to plan construction projects decades earlier. Only this time the project wasn't a building, it was a counterattack. Across the top, I wrote 3 words in bold letters: protect, expose, endure. The first step was obvious: protect what was mine. I retrieved the fireproof lockbox from my study and checked every important document: property deeds, business ownership papers, insurance policies, bank accounts. Everything was intact, but the very thought of Trevor with forged signatures and a team of sleazy lawyers upstairs the other night made my blood run cold. I decided then I'd move certain assets into a trust with Molly as the beneficiary. If my son wanted to play dirty, I'd make sure he could never touch the crown jewels of my life's work. The second step: expose. For years I'd kept meticulous records of Trevor's ventures, At first, it had been the habits of a cautious father holding on to documents in case he needed rescuing. Now those same papers would become weapons. I unlocked the filing cabinet, pulling out folders one by one. Miami condos, $75,000 loss. Cryptocurrency mining, $50,000 scam. Food truck partnership, $30,000 collapse. Each folder a monument to Trevor's reckless greed. I spread them across my desk like evidence in a courtroom. Each failure had collateral damage. Marcus Thompson, a respected businessman, had trusted Trevor with a quarter of his savings. David Rodriguez had sunk money into the crypto scheme, left with nothing but empty promises. Jennifer Walsh had poured in 20 grand, believing Trevor's food truck idea was legitimate, until his partner disappeared with the funds. These weren't just Trevor's mistakes. They were betrayals of people whose reputations carried weight in our town. If they knew the full scope, Trevor's credibility would collapse overnight. The third step, endure. Revenge fueled by anger burns fast and leaves nothing behind. I wasn't after quick satisfaction. I wanted permanence, a reckoning so complete that Trevor and Meredith couldn't rebuild their lies on anyone else's back. I had spent 40 years building with concrete and steel. I would dismantle their scheme with patience and precision. As I organized the files into neat stacks, I realized something important. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't reacting to Trevor's chaos. I was leading. This wasn't about bailing him out or softening his fall. It was about drawing a line he could never cross again. I leaned back, the morning light spilling across the desk, and said it aloud so the walls of my home could bear witness. This isn't desperation anymore. It's war, and I will not lose. By Friday morning, my study looked less like a home office and more like a war room. Papers covered the desk in neat stacks, each one a chronicle of Trevor's recklessness. Years of lies, failures, and half-truths lay sorted by victim amount and date. For the first time, I realized just how much he had squandered, not only my money, but the trust of good people who had once believed in him simply because he carried my last name. I opened a fresh box of manila envelopes and labeled the first one Marcus Thompson. Marcus had invested $25,000 into Trevor's Miami condo scheme. The glossy brochures had promised breathtaking views of Biscayne Bay, but the developer was already headed toward bankruptcy when Trevor pitched it. Inside the envelope, I placed copies of the contract wire transfer receipts and the emails where Trevor admitted he knew there were risks, but pushed forward anyway. The second envelope bore the name David Rodriguez, a family man who had chaired the local investment group. David lost $35,000 in Trevor's cryptocurrency fantasy. I added the email thread where Trevor had written, "The supplier looks questionable, but the returns are too good to miss." That single line alone revealed recklessness bordering on fraud. The third was for Jennifer Walsh, a financial consultant who had put in 20 grand for Trevor's food truck venture. I included the background check clause in the contract, the one Trevor had ignored, that required vetting his partner. That partner turned out to be a convicted embezzler who disappeared with the remaining funds 3 months later. Each envelope also contained a simple cover letter, typed in plain black ink information. For your consideration regarding Trevor Myers's business practices, please review the attached documentation and draw your own conclusions. No accusations, no dramatic language, just facts. Facts are harder to argue with than anger. When I finished sealing the last envelope, I stacked them carefully, like bricks laid for the foundation of a building. 3 bricks that would dismantle the facade Trevor had been selling. I called a courier service I trusted from years of business dealings. Anonymous delivery, I instructed. The dispatcher didn't ask questions. Cash payment ensured silence. They promised the packages would be in the recipient's hands by evening. Perfect timing. Friday night meant they'd sit with the documents all weekend, letting suspicion grow and conversations spread before Monday morning. As I handed the envelopes over to the courier, I felt a strange calm. Not satisfaction yet, that would come later, but relief. For too long, I had let Trevor dictate the terms, lurching from one scheme to another, dragging my name through the mud. Now I was taking control. When the door closed behind the courier, I stood in the quiet of my house looking at my hands. They weren't calloused the way they once were from laying brick and pouring concrete, but they were steady. Steady enough to deliver justice. Trevor had wanted me confused, weakened, drunk. Instead, he had sharpened me. And by the time those 3 envelopes landed in the right hands, his reputation would be punctured as surely as the tires he'd vandalized. The courier had barely pulled away when I turned back to my desk. Trevor's downfall was already in motion, but there was another player who had orchestrated as much of this betrayal as he had Meredith. If Trevor was reckless fire, she was the steady hand pouring gasoline. Her expensive tastes, her glittering smile, her endless nudges toward bigger risks. I'd seen her influence shape him into a man who believed shortcuts were easier than honest work. If she thought her polished career protected her, she was wrong. I opened a fresh folder labeled Meredith Myers, Pinnacle Financial Consulting. Over the years, I'd heard whispers through my network. Meredith handled high-value accounts, managing portfolios for wealthy families who depended on her judgment. Her reputation rested on one fragile pillar: trust, and trust once cracked collapses quickly. I began drafting a letter to Pinnacle's Human Resources Department. My words were precise, deliberate, free of emotion. I am providing information relevant to a potential breach of professional ethics by your employee Meredith Myers. Mrs. Myers recently attempted to participate in the manipulation of an elderly family member in order to secure control over substantial business assets. Such behavior raises questions about her ability to safeguard client interests with impartiality and integrity. Then I attached the supporting evidence. Photographs of the extravagant birthday party, a catered feast, premium liquor furniture clearly purchased beyond Trevor's modest income. I noted how such expenses appeared inconsistent with their reported financial strain. I explained how Meredith had used her knowledge of contracts and legal maneuvering to prepare documents intended to strip me of my company during that very evening. And I suggested Pinnacle investigate whether such tactics had ever been directed at their clients. The case didn't need drama. Facts alone were enough to cast doubt on her professionalism. A financial firm could overlook a missed quota, but even a whisper of client exploitation was lethal. I sealed the envelope marked for discreet delivery and scheduled another courier pickup for Monday morning. By the time Pinnacle's HR director poured their first cup of coffee, Meredith's glittering mask would already be cracking. When I leaned back in my chair, I thought of the times Meredith had sat at my dinner table speaking sweetly about family, while her eyes scanned the room like an appraiser calculating value. She had once told me, "Business is about perception, Glenn. People only see what you let them see." Well, she was about to learn how fast perception could change when truth walked in the door. I set the sealed package on top of Trevor's stack and stared at them both, father and son, husband and wife. They had believed themselves clever enough to corner me, to turn me into prey in my own family. But they had forgotten the most important lesson I had ever taught Trevor on job sites: as a boy, cut corners, and the foundation will crumble. Their foundation was already cracking. By next week, it would collapse. It was Tuesday afternoon when the pounding started. Sharp, angry blows against my front door rattled the glass panes. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. Trevor and Meredith. The storm I had been preparing for had finally arrived. I opened the door calmly, keeping my face unreadable. There they stood, both red-faced, their polished appearances cracked by panic. Trevor's tie hung loose, his eyes bloodshot as if he hadn't slept. Meredith's usual flawless poise was gone, her lips pressed thin, her posture rigid with fury. "We need to talk," Trevor barked, pushing past me into the living room without waiting for an invitation. His voice was edged with desperation, the swagger gone. Meredith followed, heels clicking against the hardwood like gunshots. "You've ruined us, Glenn," she snapped. "Don't you dare play innocent! We know what you've been doing!" I shut the door quietly and turned to face them, my hands folded in front of me. "Then let's sit down and talk like adults," I said, evenly gesturing to the couch. My calmness seemed to unnerve them. Trevor remained standing, pacing like a cornered animal. Meredith perched on the edge of the sofa, every muscle in her body taut. "Don't act like you don't know," Trevor spat. Marcus, David, Jennifer, three of the most connected people in town, suddenly got detailed dossiers about my past investments. Anonymous packages with contracts, receipts, emails. "You think we're stupid, we know it was you." And my firm, Meredith added, her voice clipped. "HR received an ethics complaint yesterday. Anonymous, but full of damning details about me, about us. They're investigating my accounts as we speak. Do you realize what you've done? You're destroying our lives." I lowered myself into my leather armchair, the same seat where I had confronted Trevor before. I steepled my fingers and met their eyes one at a time. "No," I said quietly. "I didn't destroy anything. The truth did." Trevor slammed his fist against the bookshelf, the thud reverberating through the room. "Truth, you've sabotaged me at every turn. You've never believed in me. You want me to fail. You failed yourself." I replied, my voice still calm. "All I did was ensure the people you deceived saw the full picture." Meredith leaned forward, her tone dripping with contempt. This was family, Glenn. Families don't betray each other like this. I looked at her with a cold steadiness that silenced the room. Families don't lure their elders to birthday parties, ply them with liquor, and set lawyers upstairs to steal everything they've built. Don't lecture me about betrayal. For the first time since they entered, they both fell silent. Trevor's face paled, Meredith's composure wavered. They hadn't expected me to know. I let the moment stretch, then leaned back. "You came here thinking you could intimidate me, but all you've done is confirm exactly what I already knew. You tried to rob me, and now you're angry the trap closed on you instead." The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel, and in that silence I could feel the balance of power shifting. Trevor's voice cracked through the living room like a whip so loud the window panes rattled. He stood over me, fists clenched, his face crimson with rage. "You've destroyed everything, Dad. My reputation, my career gone. Do you have any idea what you've done to your own son?" I didn't flinch. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, calm against his fury. "What I've done," I said evenly, "is lay the truth on the table. If truth ruins you, Trevor, then maybe you were standing on lies to begin with." His chest heaved, his eyes wild. "You've always wanted me to fail. Every time I tried something, you tore me down with your cynicism. You never once believed in me. And now you've humiliated me in front of the entire business community. You humiliated yourself," I replied. My voice was low, but each word carried the weight of decades. I didn't tell Marcus to invest in Miami condos that were already failing. I didn't convince David to throw his money at a crypto scam. I didn't hide a partner's embezzlement record from Jennifer. Those choices were yours. All I did was shine a light on them. Meredith, who had been quiet, suddenly snapped. This isn't about choices, it's about family. You've dragged private matters into the public eye. Do you have any idea what people are saying about me at the firm? About Trevor in town? You've made us look like criminals. I turned my gaze on her, steady and unyielding. You didn't need my help for that. You did it yourselves when you plotted to get me drunk and trick me into signing away my company. Don't talk to me about family when you were ready to sell me out for a few pages of legal documents. Her lips parted, but no words came. The accusation landed squarely because it was true. Trevor's anger shifted to desperation. He dropped into the armchair opposite me, his head in his hands. Dad, you don't understand the pressure I'm under. The bills, the expectations. Meredith expects a certain lifestyle, Molly's tuition, it's too much. I just needed one win. Just one. And you couldn't even give me that. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. But pity is not the same as forgiveness. A win built on fraud isn't a win, Trevor. It's theft. And you didn't just target me. You endangered Molly's trust. Did you think she wouldn't notice? Did you think your own daughter wouldn't see what you were doing? His head shot up, eyes wide. Molly, yes, I said firmly. She's the reason I left that party before you could spring your trap. She saw through you even if you couldn't see through yourself. The silence that followed was suffocating. Trevor's rage had drained into something hollow, fear perhaps, or shame he didn't want to admit. Meredith's polished exterior cracked further, her hands twisting in her lap as she realized control had slipped away. You think you've won? Trevor muttered finally. But this isn't over. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes with the quiet strength of a man who had weathered storms far worse. It is over, son. Not because I ruined you. Because you ruined yourself. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by Trevor's ragged breathing. His eyes darted toward Meredith as though searching for support. But even she sat stiffly, her polished facade beginning to fracture. That was when I decided it was time to end the pretense once and for all. You two came here demanding answers, I said, leaning forward in my chair. Fine. You'll get them. I know exactly what you planned at that birthday party, Molly told me. The color drained from Meredith's face. Trevor's jaw fell open. She said something to you. I replied, my voice steady. She warned me in the living room right before you tried to lure me upstairs. Grandpa, leave now. Do you know what it takes for a granddaughter to speak those words to her grandfather? She was terrified, Trevor. Terrified of her own parents. Trevor's mouth opened, but no words came. Meredith tried to recover, shaking her head. She misunderstood. We only wanted, I cut her off with a raised hand. Don't you dare spin this! She overheard you both plotting in the kitchen the night before. She heard you say I'd be drunk enough to sign anything, that older men get confused when they drink. She told me there were lawyers waiting upstairs. And when I left, she covered for herself by lying to you. Said she just worried about me driving at night. That girl is smarter and braver than either of you deserve. Trevor sank back, stunned, his eyes wide. Meredith's lips parted, but she couldn't mask the panic rising in her expression. And as for my tires, I continued letting the words drop like stones. Mrs. Henderson saw you, Trevor. She was sitting on her porch Tuesday night. She watched you circle my car and drive nails into all 4 tires. She didn't want to interfere, but when she saw the damage, she told me the truth. I didn't want to believe her at first. But after Molly's warning after the birthday party, it all added up. You sabotaged my car, then set a trap to strip me of my company. Trevor shot to his feet, face red, fists clenched. She's lying, he shouted. That old woman has always been nosy. She's known you since you were a boy, I interrupted sharply. She had no reason to lie. And I trust her word more than yours because, unlike you, she's never given me reason to doubt her honesty. The outburst deflated him. He stood there trembling, his rage now mixed with fear, realizing there was no defense left. Meredith spoke, then her voice brittle. So what now, Glenn? You expose us, you ruin us, and you sit back feeling righteous. I met her eyes cold and unflinching. No, I don't need to ruin you. You've already done that yourselves. All I did was shine a light on what was already there, and now you'll face the consequences. For the first time since they entered my home, they both fell silent not out of defiance, but because they had no weapons left to fight with. Trevor slumped onto the couch, his hands raking through his hair, as though he could pull a better answer from his skull. Dad, he said, his voice shaking now, you don't understand. I just needed help. That's all I ever wanted, your help. Help, I repeated, my tone sharper than I intended. Help is what I gave you for years. Help is what I gave when I paid for your education, when I hired you in the business, when I covered your debts after Miami, after crypto, after the food truck fiasco. Help is what I gave when I opened my wallet every time you came knocking with sad eyes and promises you never kept. He looked up at me, guilt flashing in his eyes, but only for a moment. So what? I make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. You're my father. You're supposed to stand by me. I leaned forward, my voice steady, carrying the weight of decades of sacrifice. Standing by you doesn't mean letting you drag me into the mud. It doesn't mean letting you steal from me. There's a line, Trevor, and you crossed it when you plotted to rob me under my own roof. Meredith straightened, her voice cold-clipped. So you're just going to throw away your own son after all the years, all the family holidays, everything you've built together? I turned to her, my eyes locking with hers. Family isn't just blood, Meredith. Family is loyalty, respect, trust. And you two decided those things were optional the moment you schemed to strip me of what I spent 40 years building. You stopped being family the moment you chose greed over honor. Trevor buried his face in his hands. Dad, please. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. That's the problem, I said quietly. You never knew what else to do but cheat and hope someone else bailed you out. And Meredith, you encouraged him. You whispered in his ear that shortcuts were better than sweat, that deception was smarter than discipline. Don't think I don't see your hand in all of this. For once, Meredith didn't have a comeback. She stared at me, lips pressed tight, eyes burning with a hatred she could no longer hide. I stood slowly, the years in my joints, reminding me I wasn't the young man I once was, but my voice carried the steel of a builder who had weathered storms no one thought he'd survive. This ends here. Whatever bond we had, it's broken. You will not touch my business. You will not touch my home. And if you try again, I'll ensure the law knows every detail of what you've done. Trevor looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. Maybe for the first time in his life he realized his father wasn't a safety net. Family, I said again, the word heavy with finality. You stopped being family when you tried to rob me. The silence that followed was the sound of a door closing forever. The air in the room had turned thick, heavy with words that couldn't be unsaid. Trevor sat hunched on the couch, his shoulders sagging, his face pale. Meredith stayed rigid beside him. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the sparkle of her ring catching the lamplight, but doing nothing to hide the cracks in her composure. I stood my back straight, my voice steady. You came here thinking you could shame me, intimidate me, or somehow undo the damage you've brought on yourselves. But understand, this justice isn't revenge. It's accountability. And right now, both of you are reaping the harvest of the seeds you planted. Trevor looked up, eyes bloodshot. Dad, please. I made mistakes, but I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything? It meant everything, I said softly. That's why I gave you chance after chance. That's why I cleaned up after your failures, why I shielded you from consequences longer than I should have. But love without truth is just enabling. And by protecting you, I let you believe you could keep taking, keep lying, keep scheming without end. That stops today. Meredith finally spoke, her tone clipped, desperate to salvage something. We can fix this. If you just call Marcus, David, Jennifer, if you explain it was a misunderstanding, if you take back what you said, I cut her off, my voice sharp. No. I will not lie for you. I will not cover for you. Those people deserve to know exactly who they trusted and what it cost them. And Pinnacle deserves to know what kind of woman they've entrusted with their clients' futures. Her face went white at the mention of her firm. For the first time, she looked less angry and more afraid. I turned back to Trevor. You thought you could get me drunk, haul me upstairs, and steal the company with a forged signature. You thought you could puncture my tires to prove a point. But what you forgot is that truth leaves a paper trail, and I've kept every page. You haven't been fighting me, Trevor. You've been fighting your own record. The weight of my words seemed to crush him. His head dropped into his hands. He didn't argue anymore, didn't shout, didn't blame. He just sat there, beaten not by me, but by the reflection of himself laid bare. I stepped toward the door and opened it wide. The cool evening air spilled into the room, a fresh gust that felt like cleansing. It's time for you both to go, I said. Trevor rose slowly, his movements heavy. Meredith followed her heels, clicking like gunshots on the hardwood. Neither looked at me as they stepped outside. On the porch, Trevor turned, once his eyes hollow. But I gave him nothing, no pity, no comfort, only silence. They walked to their car with the posture of people who had gambled everything and lost. I stood in the doorway until their taillights disappeared down Maple Street, then closed the door with finality. For the first time in weeks, the house felt quiet, not with fear, but with peace. In the days that followed, I found myself sitting often in my study, looking at the stacks of documents that had once felt like burdens. Now they felt like shields, proof that I hadn't been crazy, that the betrayal I sensed was real, and that truth had a way of standing taller than lies. Trevor and Meredith thought they could outsmart me, that age made me weak and blind. But age, when tempered with experience, makes you sharper. And the lesson is this: sometimes the greatest kindness is saying no even to your own blood. If you're a parent or grandparent listening now, hear me clearly: love your children, but don't confuse love with surrender. Protect what you've built. Protect your dignity. Because if people, family, or not choose deceit, they must also choose the consequences. I often think about Molly, the one bright spot in this dark chapter. Her courage reminded me that integrity can skip a generation and still survive. My legacy isn't just the company or the assets I've secured, it's the values she will carry forward, because she chose truth over silence. Now I want to ask you, have you ever faced betrayal from your own family? Did you fight back, or did you walk away? What lesson did it leave with you? Share your story in the comments. And if mine has spoken to you, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for listening. Remember, justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as the truth finally being heard.